Hello everyone, thank you for joining me. Today I'm delighted to be joined by Gordon Donovan, the Global VP of Research at SAP. Gordon, welcome, thank you for joining me.
Andrew, thanks for inviting me. Lovely to be here. Hello everybody.
It's my pleasure. So Gordon and I have been talking about doing this video for a while. This is part of our agentic procurement education series around, we focus a lot around AI and skills. And Gordon, before we get into the conversation about some of the research we're going to discuss, just tell my audience, if you would, do a little bit about your own role at SAP, if you would.
Yeah, so I've been in this role now for about 5 years. So I'm global, as you say, I'm Global Vice President of Research for Procurement and External Workforce. My background is procurement and supply chain. I've been CPO of a number of companies, and whilst I live in Australia, you'll gather from the majority of the time of my accent that I'm originally from the UK, but I emigrated about 20 years ago. I can hear an Australianism there you go. Yeah, but I've worked in procurement and supply chain all my life. Role that I do now, one of the things about SAP is we are really keen to ensure that as we develop our product and as we develop the solutions that we have, that it's very much market-led and data-driven. And so one of the ways that we do that is through the research that we directly sponsor and get, like some of the things we're going to talk about today, but also by kind of reading and listening to everything that's going on in the market, both from our customers, but also from lots of other consultancies, and really bringing that in and saying, so where's the market going? Where is it now? Where's it going to go? What are the issues that procurement leaders are facing? And therefore, how does the technology help to solve some of those problems? And that's kind of, the role that I kind of fulfill is to kind of inform the engineering team that, look, this is what the data says, to inform the marketing team, hey, look, this is what the messaging is, to inform the sales team, hey, these are the problems that our customers are having, that we need to be able to talk to them about how our solutions kind of solve. So that's kind of my role.
Great. And we're going to talk about a few different research studies today, but one of the main focus will be the ones on the Economist that SAP commissioned, if I'm not mistaken. And you presented this at the SAP Customer Day that I was at a couple of weeks ago. And one of the things that really stood out to me was the amount of people that contributed to this and the breadth in terms of the geographical spread. So just give us a sense of the dimensions of it, you would do, please, Gordon.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, I think it's one of the things that makes this study stand out. So it's now in its 4th year. We've just renewed for the 5th year as well. So I've literally just closed off the survey for this year. So that'll be live in the next few weeks. So 2026 was the number of respondents that we had this year. We had over 2,000 as well last year. In total, since we've been doing this, we've had over 5,000 people kind of responding. So it gives us a real view over the last 4 years as to what's going on. And there's probably 2 major differences with this piece of it. 3. One, the size of the number of respondents. I think it's probably the largest procurement study in the world. If it's not the largest, it's one of the largest.
Yeah.
But I think the real point of difference is that we don't solely ask CPOs and procurement leaders about procurement. We ask all the personas in the C-suite. We ask CFOs, chief operating officers, chief supply chain officers, chief HR officers, and chief procurement officers about all the issues that they're hoping procurement helps solve and the direction that procurement is traveling in. And of course, it's in those differences from a persona perspective that you really get to see where some issues might actually lie. And then not only that, but we also segment via industry. And we've got 13 industries. Again, each one of these I can do a separate industry report on. The magic number that I say to people is 135. There's your magic number. At 130, you get what we say statistical significance.
Right.
And that's at around, say, 90% certainty that it's representative of the larger population. I think 100's okay, but you're about 70%. Under 100, I worry that there's just not enough. Certainly when you start to cut some of the data, you don't really have it, which is the reason why I have so many. And then countries as well. So we have over 13 countries and 2 geographies that we treat as a separate country. Again, each one of those countries has got statistical significance in its data. And once again, you can see that there are differences from a geographical perspective as well as from an industry perspective. And that starts to paint a picture of how procurement is more mature in certain parts of the world, more mature in certain industries, more mature but from certain personas than other things. And you can start to understand how all of those kind of things kind of hang together.
Yeah, I think that's what makes it so credible. And just so, if you've not seen this research, I'll put the link in the YouTube notes when we post the video. So, of course, for me, a lot of the focus is on skills, people, talent, and I think a few things come through quite strongly that I want to discuss with you today. And I think across the research, if there's one message that comes through about the hot topic at the moment, AI, of course, is that the actual technology is not the barrier anymore. It's the skills that's the big gap. Technology is accelerating faster than procurement teams can really adapt. And I think future procurement organisations really need to start thinking about AI-ready talent and operating models, not just AI-ready systems. Is that something? Is that a fair point, Gordon?
Yeah, absolutely. I think certainly AI skills was something that came through very loudly, both from a skills perspective, as well as actually from a priorities perspective and from a risk perspective. So one of the things that I think was interesting this year was to see the general alignment between organizational risk, strategic priorities, KPIs to measure what procurement does, and the skills that organizations are requiring. I'll say general alignment because there are some areas that you and I have talked about that have made probably both of us go, that's a problem. Which we'll kind of come on to. But generally, yes, AI was number 2 risk in the short term, number 2 risk in the long term. It was one of the top 4 strategic priorities, depending on where you are in the world. This is one of these geography things that we talked about. So like in North America, for instance, AI strategy and implementation was the number 1 strategic priority. It wasn't in other parts of the world. So you can kind of see, but it's always in the top 4.
Yeah.
To be fair, it's always in the top 3, wherever you are in the world. And then again, when you start looking at the KPIs, digital adoption, digital matrices are there, which is something I mentioned at DPW that was a real different kind of thing for me. And then again, from a skills perspective, you certainly look at AI proficiency and ethics and how you're going to use AI as a key skill. So you do see that kind of line going through. That's good. It's going to go through everything.
And you mentioned that it's not procurement leaders; it's over 2,000 C-suite execs from different functions. In terms of the way procurement is viewed within the organisation, its role inside the business, is there anything that particularly stood out about the perspectives from other C-suite leaders that you noticed in the research? I
think that the general theme that I would say that really has come through, and it's come through relatively strongly in the last 2 or 3 years as well. And I think there's a few reasons for this. So the first thing that I kind of would note is the reporting lines of procurement have shifted away from CFOs and more to COOs.
Yeah.
So this year it was over 40% of organizations said that their procurement reported through the COO rather than the CFO. The knock-on effect of that is that the focus on cost and cost management, whilst not disappearing at all, and nor do I ever think it will.
No.
But the focus is a lot more on resilience and building resilience within organizations from a supply chain perspective than it is necessarily about getting an extra 2% of cost savings. I think that those cost savings are expected, but I don't believe that they're not prioritized. They're not one of the top 4 priorities. And the reason why they're not one of the top 4 priorities is largely because it's something that happens as a natural way of procurement working anyway.
Yeah.
I think to work in procurement, you have that kind of somewhere in the back of your head as to you're always looking to try and save the company money for in lots of different ways. But the focus is a lot more on resilience, and I point that down in a big way because of the reporting line through to operations.
Yeah.
So this resilience piece is something that I'm certainly seeing, and that this year more so than any other year, that alignment between strategic priorities and organizational risks that they want procurement to focus on is something that is different this year than before.
Is that tariffs, COVID, ESG? Anything particularly you think is driving that going, or is it a mixture of a number of factors?
It's going to be a mixture. So for instance, so geopolitical dynamics was the top organizational risk that they want procurement to focus on. And whilst I'll jokingly say, so if the teams in procurement can sort that out, in the next couple of hours, that'd be really handy. Well done, everyone. Clearly, what I'm meaning with that is what the organization is asking here is, how are these geopolitical issues going to impact our category strategies to ensure that we get hold of that supply? What are we going to do to help mitigate and minimize those issues? And that could be anything from multi-sourcing to reconfiguring the supply base, the supply chain, to more local sourcing, more friend-shoring, more onshoring, all of those different things. There's no one right answer. You're going to pull from a lot of these different levers depending on the category itself. So that alignment is clear. And the reason why I isolate that is we asked a question around satisfaction and confidence in category management, satisfaction and confidence in strategic sourcing, confidence in specific risk strategies for categories. And it's that last one where the highly confident was like 20%.
Right.
And so you can kind of see this is where the issue is. And if we look back to last year, the confidence that the rest of the business had in procurement's ability to manage global external risks dropped 30% from the year before.
Right.
And the reason why that was, when we carried out some of the interviews, the reason why that was because it was largely driven from inflation and from interest rates.
Right.
And they're not expecting procurement to sort interest rate and inflation. If only we could.
Yeah.
If only we could sort out that problem. But the issue was this, and this is where the specific risk strategies came in. It's not like it's not happened before.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's not like we haven't had a global financial crisis. It's not like we haven't had rampant inflation and rampant interest rates. You and I, without giving away our ages, know we've been through at least 3 of them, right? And the business's issue was, why weren't we better prepared? This isn't the pandemic where it was a once in a lifetime, once in a generational issue that you can't prepare for. You can't prepare for those kind of black swan events. You can prepare for something where it might be you don't know when it's going to happen, but you know it's going to happen. And if you've looked far enough ahead, you could probably start to see some indicators. And so the scenario plans, what if, that was the big thing. And when we ask questions around what's the thing that you can do to improve category management the biggest answer was scenario plans. So you join all these little data points together and you go, okay, so there's a real clear thing here. The business want procurement to do a better job about thinking about specific risk strategies for these specific categories, produce scenario plans, think about the things that might happen in 3 years' time, in 5 years' time. Look further ahead than what you're looking at now to be able to start thinking about what that means and what it means for our business. And what I believe the opportunity for procurement is right now. And I was reading an article about an hour and a half ago, and it said, if agentic AI and if AI is going to save 60% of your time to focus on the more strategic activities, what are you going to do? And my answer is that.
Yeah.
Do that because that's not easy. It is not. It's not easy at all to do that level of scenario plan, to do that level of depth, to look that far into the future and think about what are the things that might happen that would then tell me an early warning buoy that's saying, oh, hang on, well, that happens there, so I've got to think about what that means for this particular category, and they've got to activate my scenario plan. Agility, being agile in procurement, it just means that you're better prepared, that you've looked further enough into the future and you've identified events that might happen that would allow you to trigger your mitigation plans. And that, I think, is where the future of procurement really, really is thinking about those kind of things and tying it a lot more to revenue and the things that your organization's customers care about, not your internal stakeholders, but your customers care about, and think about that. That for me is what we should be doing with that 60% of the time that AI is going to save for.
So there's a lot out there around risk. You've touched there towards the end on sort of what I would call value creation for the organization in terms of that customer focus. So what does that mean in terms of the skill set for procurement, Gordon? Are procurement people equipped now with the skills and the technology to be able to deliver what you're talking about there? Or what's that journey going to look like over the next few years for them to get to that point whereby they are equipped to deliver that?
Well, I think there's some things that we need to unlearn, which is tough.
Yeah. Sorry.
In terms of the skills, how to use AI to think about. I mean, and Tasha, my CMO for SAP, talks about the 3 A's: assist, augment, and automate. And think about how you're going to use some of the tasks that you've got now and the tasks that you want to do. How are you going to use AI to either assist you, to augment what you do, or to actually automate it and take it away in the first place? Yeah. Now, those for me would be the first thing, thinking about that. And the thing that I would say to people is, I don't think you can use AI as a bolt-on.
Right.
I don't think it's something that says, this is my process, where can I use AI to help? I actually think you're going to have to almost go. This is why I say about unlearning what you've
Yeah.
learned. It's go back to the starting bit here and say, actually, what's the outcomes I'm trying to achieve? What does the technology allow me to do? Then start thinking about your process rather than have your process. I like my process and do that. And I think that's one of the reasons why, for instance, the digitization of procurement has taken longer than people thought it was going to. It's still a thing. It's still one of the top 4 strategic priorities is digitization, is source to pay technology. And you would think it would be faster along. And I think part of the reason is that we've held on to our processes and we've just tried to take a process and apply digitization to it, as opposed to rethinking our processes and going, well, what does the technology allow me to do? And yes, there's guardrails, and yes, you've got to think about, and every organization is going to be different and every industry is different. Where's the human in the loop? Where do I have that? What's the point at which we just let go? For me, I would be thinking now, and almost setting a target for myself that says, why are we still doing RFPs when I could probably get technology to automate that as much as I possibly can? Because I want to be doing the stuff that I've just talked about, because how much more fun and interesting is that? That's great. So in order for those kind of things to happen, we've almost got to let go of almost the traditional procurement skills of running a process, of tendering, of potentially even win-lose negotiations. Because I think that's different. I think what we're looking at now is more the AI skills, the proficiency in how to use, even just starting, how to write good prompts is a good thing. The ethics of using some of the technology that comes out. I think there's an ethics kind of piece around that. Data security. I talk a lot around, whilst AI is a massive opportunity, it's also a risk. And so one of the big things that we look at is the cybersecurity piece. I don't think we necessarily need to be cybersecurity experts, but I do think we need to know more about cybersecurity than we currently do. And I think we need to start asking questions of our supply base around what they're doing, and more importantly, what due diligence are they doing on their suppliers and their suppliers? Because if you look at all the impacts and all the issues of all the different cyber attacks that's happened, it doesn't go to the top. It doesn't go to the big fella in town. It goes to the really small organization, because that's the easiest point of entry. And it's no different than what I know my father used to turn around and say to me, you want to make your front of your house look tough to get into, so the burglar goes somewhere else rather than coming to you. And it's the same with cybersecurity, in my opinion.
Yes.
It's like you want to make sure that you've got that due diligence piece in place for your tier 3, tier 4, tier 5 suppliers, because that's potentially where your risk is. But you need to know what you're looking for. Yeah. And so I think some cybersecurity skills is something that organizations need to invest in.
Well, it's interesting you mentioned that, because we published research last year with Simon Gill about the digital skills for procurement, and cybersecurity was highlighted then. Just from simple things like your own, good practice in how you use your systems that work through to into the supply chain. But you make a really interesting point earlier about the ability to unlearn old ways of doing things, and your point about digitizing systems and old processes. We've highlighted 7 skills at Agentic that we think are critical for the AI era, and adaptive intelligence is one of those 7. And that at its heart is resilience. But critically, it's the ability to unlearn old ways of doing things and learn new ways of doing things. So, Tosh's point, you mentioned, and that's absolutely fundamental. We haven't talked about intellectual curiosity, but adaptive intelligence is right up there with it, because you are having to reimagine completely new ways of doing things and letting go of things that you might be doing in your career for 20, 30 years in some cases that are no longer relevant anymore. And I think that is something which is very, very difficult for a lot of people.
Completely.
The time that you and I have been in our careers, we've had IQ, we've had EQ. Well, AQ now is a really important thing. Your adaptability quotient is a really important thing for people to relearn, or rather unlearn, old ways of doing things and be able to adapt. And that's not going to go away. That's going to keep coming in cycles as the technology develops.
Yeah, the adaptability. I heard the first time I heard that was a lady called Sally Geyer from World Commerce and Contracting. It was a round table that I was at. That was actually run by the Economist, and Sally was there, and she talked about AQ, the adaptability quotient, and that was a couple of years ago. And I thought to myself, that's absolutely bang on in terms of the things that we need to think about, because that adaptability piece is broad enough. And I think the emotional quotient is going to be incredibly important as well as the IQ, but the ability to adapt to a world that is changing so rapidly, to technology that is changing so rapidly. 3 years ago, generative AI wasn't on the Gartner hype cycle. I don't, and I would say in 2 years' time it won't be on the hype cycle either, because it'll have gone through the entire thing and it'll be off the other end. Agentic AI has entered the chat room this year, and what Gartner is saying is 2 to 5 years it'll be off as well.
Yeah,
Moore's law, that doubling of capacity, is now at the point where, I remember chatting to someone 4 years ago and asking him about quantum computing, and about, is this something that we need to think about? And he said to me at the time, it's not for about another 15 years. I asked him 6 months ago, and when that 15 years goes, no, that's not. We'll be talking about that in about 3 to 4 years, the way this is going. Because the biggest break is probably is energy. That's the break.
Yeah.
Because the amount of energy that some of this stuff consumes, and Kelly Barner wrote a really interesting article about this about a year or so ago, around to run a Gen AI search takes something like 5 times the energy than a regular Google search. So the constraint, I think, there's a couple of constraints here around how quick this can go. One is obviously the availability of semiconductors, the availability of chips, and all manner of different rare earth minerals and all sorts of other stuff that we won't necessarily go into, because there is a little bit of politics, as Mr. Ben Alton would turn around and say. We'll reference him. But I think the other one is energy, is energy consumption, which is interesting, because again, one of the priorities that we come up with, one of the skills that organizations have is sustainability skills. That's quite high in the kind of thing. And it's interesting. I was at DPW, John Ferguson, who I co-presented with from Economist Impact, mentioned the phrase green hushing, when organizations are still doing ESG initiatives, but they're not telling anyone about it because it doesn't appear to be as in vogue. It's interesting, because since that talk, I noted the EU have walked back an awful lot of their CBAM provisions that were supposedly coming out, and some of the legislation has dropped down a bit, which is, it's going to be fascinating next year when I get the Economist research through as to what the position of sustainability is with all of these changes. It certainly dropped in the US.
Yeah, indeed, yeah. Well, politicians have moved away from it, but let's not go into that bit. But that point you made, I remember John said that green hushing. I'd not heard that before or since, but I thought it was a really interesting point there. But getting back to skills, you picked up on sustainability again. That's something which featured in our digital skills research last year. We've not put it in the AI ones now. That's not to say it's not important, but I think that's obviously still something which procurement's got a very big part to play. But getting back to the sort of human skills, as we move, as with the rise of AI and co-pilots and agentic coming as well, I think some of the human skills are shifting, and I think critical thinking and strategic thinking too that we've highlighted. Is that something which you think was backed up by the research?
Yeah, I think the critical strategic thing is good. The bits that cause me concern were 2 skills that were at the bottom both in the 12 to 18 month time frame and in the 3 to 5 year time frame. And these 2 skills, whenever you get a group of CPOs together and you ask them about skills they look for, they're always at the top when they say that. But when presented with a list of skills to choose from, not just CPOs, but the entirety of the C-suite had these 2 as last, and that is curiosity and change management. And that, I think, it does cause me that curiosity and problem solving. If we want procurement to do the picture that I painted earlier around that future thinking as to how these categories are going to change, what are the early warning systems, you have to innately be curious in order to kind of ask those questions. If you want to write better prompts, you have to be curious to ask the next follow-up question. And it could be as simple as asking the 5 whys. I mean, that was something we learned ages ago from Ishikawa and that sort of technique from a risk management perspective or a process improvement perspective. So it did make me go, I think that's a miss that we have that. So for me, it would be in the top 2 or 3. I get the technical AI proficiency skill. I get the technical sustainability skill. Those are more knowledge-based skills. I think when we think about, and I'm going to call them interpersonal or people skills, because I don't like the phrase soft skills, just for the simple reason that I think soft puts a connotation around a skill which turns people off. So I've been on a crusade for about 10 years to say, no, they're not soft skills. They're innately hard because they are interpersonal, they are people skills. And that ability to ask why, that ability to be curious about something, to go into the next level of depth is what I think you're going to do with the 60% of the time you're going to save. But it's also going to help you get to that 60% of the time in the first place, because you should be innately curious as to say, so how is AI going to help me do some of these things? And I think that is probably, if I was prioritizing any skill at all in hiring people, the technical skills I can teach. I can send people on a course how to do AI. I can teach them about sustainability skills. I can teach them digital procurement skills if needs be. But you're either curious about something and want to try and solve problems, or you're not. And for me, that's the thing. That's what I'm looking for. That's the ability that I want to try and find and harness and grow. Everyone's curious. It's about how do we bring it out of people and make them and allow them to bring it to work.
We've made that our number one. Intellectual curiosity is our number one. We say without that, you're not going to even develop any sort of AI fluency. You know, the mindset's got to be there for you to embrace this sort of new era. It's a fundamental part of AQ as well. And to your point about change management, I couldn't agree more. Again, you know, we've not actually made that one of the 7. Well, that's simply because it's always been a very important part of procurement, but I think it's going to become increasingly the case. Yeah. And if you're going to really get your team in the mindset of having intellectual curiosity and creativity and having that AQ and developing skills like critical and strategic thinking to a next level, your scenario planning that you talk about with your risk management, they're all underpinned by this sort of thing. And if you're not hiring intellectually curious people now, it's going to cost you at some point in the not too distant future. I think you and I go to an enormous amount of conferences. All the conversations, all the presentations are all focusing on that, which the top procurement functions are hiring people with those mindsets. And you know, sometimes people connect that with age. That's a mistake. You know, it's not about that. It's about the mindset of wanting to develop and get better at what you do, quite frankly. And I think if you're not doing that, you need to get with the program pretty sharpishly if you're not using that in your profession, really, in my opinion.
And I think everyone is innately curious. It's the reason why we came out of the cave. We wanted to see what was there. And so I think as leaders, our job as procurement leaders is to, how do I allow that to happen in a way that people can feel safe by asking those why questions, by questioning stuff. The only time you get any change is someone questioning something. The only time we get any improvement is by someone questioning the way that something is done. And the change management piece is a key part of that. An old boss of mine used to say to me, we're in the business of change. If we can't change, we can't manage change, then that's a problem for us, because most of the things that we're doing requires someone to change something. It's not necessarily going to be keeping the same. We're always about changing things. So we need to understand the process of change and how people change. We need to, I think, and every CPO that I speak to, when asked about digital procurement and asked about digital transformations, there isn't one that I've met yet that turned around and said, you know what I overinvested in? I overinvested in change management. I have never heard that at all.
Yeah.
I've always said I should have done more change management because it should have been easier than what it was. I just didn't invest enough in it. And because it's tougher to find the ROI on a change management thing until after you've proven the fact it's not been effective. So you do need to think about that just from a change management skills. And certainly when I used to run training programs and used to run various like corporate reward programs, there was part of that was always about, have you got the ability to stand up in front of a room full of people and sell the change that you're asking for? And the ones that did, you can tell pretty much straight away what I've gone on to have really, really good careers. Like there was one I remember, I won't name them, but 5 minutes into their piece, and the CFO was in the room. And the CFO stopped this person. I went, just stop. Have I understood this right? If we do this, this, and this, you're telling me the ROI on this is 6 months? Stop. Go do it now. Stop it. Whatever you need. He turned to me and said, whatever you need to pass them. Stop. I don't want to waste another second. Go and do it.
It's fascinating, really. I listened to a really great podcast last week. So there's a guy called Jeremy Utley who teaches AI at Stanford in the States, and he has a series called Beyond the Prompt. And they had these guys, I can't remember the name of the company, unfortunately, but these guys on who've been in change for 30 years, and they do the science of change. So lots of studies around that, and now updating that for the AI era. And they talk about really great change programs, which we communicated from the very top in terms of what it means to the organization. But at a management level, so mid-management level, it needs to be communicated to the people as to what it means for them and their role in the organization. And to your point, effectively selling the program to them as to why they should get on board. And that's where you start to get really special things happen. I think, I'll put that podcast in the show notes as well, because that is really worth a sort of 45 minutes of your time.
I'd like to listen to it.
Well, no, actually, it's a fantastic one. But I mean, we talk about change. We've touched on the skills already. Operating models, that's something else which I think we've been a lot of discussion around how they are going to change. I'm not sure anyone's quite sure what an AI-enabled procurement operating model is going to look like. Can you share anything from your research and your conversations on that?
What we've been seeing is, and it's interesting because I've got the question in next year's study as well, because I want to see what people are thinking about. But in the last study that I've seen, and subsequently, when I've read other articles, there's an interesting McKinsey article about this recently, much more to move towards a CoE model than anything else. And that CoE model is intrinsically smaller in its design because it's a center of excellence, with a lot more devolved activities back to business units through the use of technology and what have you. Whereas the CoE is focused on good practices, it's focused on being an information engine, things like the kind of the risk profiles, on thinking that longer term, the connection, I think, with revenue, in terms of, this is a bit I always say that I see this sometimes, that when we segment the categories in which we have influence, I don't necessarily think that I think we look at it from a what's strategic and what's not strategic. I think people are still looking at external market risk and value price. CROIC, basically, it's still the dominant, and there's nothing wrong with CROIC. I would just add one other factor in to this, which is the proximity to the end customer. Right. To start thinking about how close is this to the end customer? How important is this to the end customer? Because I think that ultimately is going to tie procurement to revenue more than anything else. Because that's been a question that I think procurement leaders have asked for a while, which is, we want to be seen more as more than a cost engine, more than in case of glass break procurement, more than just to sort out this from a market risk perspective. How do we tie ourselves to revenue? Well, the way we tie ourselves to revenue is to understand the ultimate customers of our company, be it public sector or private sector, and ask the question, why do they buy from us? And if they do buy from us, what is it that they want? And I've worked in public and private sector, and once you have that information, it does provide a lot more clarity as to what is actually a strategic contract and what is not a strategic contract. And it will start to help you think about potentially subdividing some of these things up and go, well, that element is unbelievably strategic. And that, again, comes back to category strategy, and start thinking about it from a category and a subcategory perspective, and start thinking about the proximity of those kind of things.
Interesting. I interviewed a very well-respected digital transformation leader from one of my customers last week, from research I'm doing about how you build business cases and start to develop the ROI, to your point earlier about your CFO. And he said, look, everything starts with the customer, the impact on the customer, and then we reverse engineer it backwards as to how we actually deliver that value. And I thought, I'm looking forward to publishing that. I've got a few more interviews in that series before we're able to publish. But it was a fascinating piece, fascinating conversation, rather, from someone who's very, very well respected in that area. So just sort of as we move towards the end, Gordon, of this conversation, just thinking about what this means now for procurement leaders building AI-ready teams for the future. We talked about skills, we talked about operating models, we talked about the value that businesses want. With all this, pulling all this together, where do you think the focus should be for CPOs right now in terms of thinking about what we're going to do over the next 3 to 5 years with these new technologies in procurement to achieve the goals that we've talked about?
From an almost like an op model perspective, and it's interesting. I sat on a panel a few weeks ago, and I got asked about what does procurement look like in 10 years' time, and my answer was I've absolutely no idea. And the reason why I don't think anyone can have an idea as to what it's going to look like is because technology is changing so rapidly. So when you say 3 to 5 years, I'd almost come back and say, I don't think you can look 5 years ahead at the moment for those types of things, because I don't think we understand what comes after agentic.
Right.
I think a lot of people do understand it from a technology perspective, but in terms of thinking about how it gets applied into procurement, the beauty for me of agentic is, for me, it's the ultimate silo buster, because the bots don't care about fee flows.
Yeah.
And if you look at most organizations, there's barriers put up, knowingly or unknowingly, about how do all of these kind of different parts of the business coexist. Bots don't care. They just want the information. They're going to bring the information back and someone's going to make a decision on it. It's the ultimate silo buster. And that, I think, is fantastic, because it'll provide productivity. Importantly, though, it's got to provide growth for the organization, because productivity without growth is a problem. I was reading a Gartner report, and they were suggesting in 2028, the expectation is there'll be more jobs created because of AI than are potentially being lost because of AI. 'Twas ever thus. AI is an industrial revolution.
Yeah.
You know, I just think that the time frame is so compressed. Previously, industrial revolutions took 30 years to see the impact and effect. The change to electric from whatever was before electric. I'm old. I'm not that old. So it was about 30 years. Whereas I think we're seeing these things changing in 3 to 5 years. So what would I be focusing on? I think when you turn around and talked about agility and agile and having that mindset, I think that's what we're going to have to be. I think we're going to have to be ready to make very quick changes. Now, that could mean, and that doesn't necessarily mean from a category perspective, but in terms of how we're set up, how we're going to do something, have as much of an open mind and be as agile as possible to do something. As one of the reasons why I've kind of seen in various other pieces of research that we've been doing, and including The Economist, the organizations are thinking about outsourcing big chunks of stuff, not necessarily procurement, but outsourcing chunks of the business. And that outsourcing is actually going to give you agility in that. So I wouldn't surprise me that we see a bit of a hybrid thing going on, whilst we're bringing in external workforce and external labor to help cover some gaps and what have you. And then think about the upskilling piece. Yes, the AI piece, but the curiosity piece. Most research I'm seeing now is suggesting that headcount is probably going to be reduced over the next 12 to 18 months in procurement. I've had a preview of a report that gets published in January in 2026. Not one of ours, it's someone else's, but I've got a copy of that, and that says that. There was a procurement leaders piece that came out that said exactly the same thing. So I think organizations, and that in many ways is lined up with the CoE model, because you will see a constriction.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, all the anecdotal evidence I've got from conversations suggest that people think that's the direction of travel in terms of smaller teams and perhaps more talent-dense teams, where you've perhaps got more senior people and more experienced people in the organisation that are able to use the outputs from the technology. I think you talk about industrial revolutions. I think obviously the scary thing is always that we can see the jobs that are potentially going to go or likely going to go. We're not quite sure what the new jobs are going to look like in terms of what we'll be creating. I think it's very difficult still to see that, I think, in the AI era. We've tried to look into what new jobs might be created in procurement, and we've landed on 2 or 3 that we think will be reasonably likely to happen. So one, just get my notes down here. So we're sort of like an agent orchestrator, somebody who's managing clusters of agents that are deployed to do specific tasks in the sourcing process, for example. We think it's likely to be sort of governance and compliance leads, experts in AI governance and compliance. And then you've got obviously roles around data and AI analysis, what we think. So there's 3. I mean, there's more, but I think they're the 3 that stand out to me as being likely to actually develop into real roles. Have you got any thoughts on that sort of thing?
Data scientists are ones that I remember. There was a piece of research about 12 to 18 months ago that talked about one of the roles that might be emerging is like a data scientist role. That I can see happening. We talked a lot about curiosity, and we talked a lot about having the ability to ask why and to take the outputs from some of the other things and then start asking the next set of questions. That is a key role. Now, I happen to see that almost as a category manager role. But I think what the traditional category manager role is, and what the category manager role over the next 12, 18, 24, 36 months is going to be, I think that's going to evolve tremendously. So the role, the job title might be the same, but I think the things that category manager will be doing will be different. I hope it's different. I think when we think about category management, and if you haven't spoke to Mark Webb or read any of Mark's, again, you'll know Mark well. He was at the same thing as you, I think, last week, right? Mark has talked about this for longer than I have. It's probably where I got the idea from. But the whole point is that the vast majority of category managers probably originated as strategic sourcing people. And I use the word strategic with guidance, because I don't believe there's much strategic about sourcing. If sourcing is the strategy that you've done, you're actually, all you're doing at that point is executing a strategy. That's a tactical execution of a strategic decision, of which that strategic decision is sourcing. I think, and I remember talking to a couple of CPOs who had real problems about getting their category manager to do anything other than sourcing, because that's all they knew how to do, because that's where they came from. If we want to evolve category management to deliver the value that I think that Mark talks about that it can deliver, then we have to evolve away from being the only strategy is running sourcing, or the majority of strategy sourcing event. A friend of mine, Paul Rogers, used to turn around and say, if the only tool you have is a hammer, then every problem becomes a nail. And I remember that phrase and going, this is exactly the point that he was talking to. If all we can do is run a sourcing event, then that's always going to be the strategy. A.T. Carney, when it was still called A.T. Carney, called Carney now, wrote a book called The Purchasing Chessboard a while ago, 10 years ago, if not longer. 64 different strategies to create value, of which one was running an RFQ or an RFP. For me, category management is about exploring the other 63.
Yeah, and what do you need to do that, particularly this new era, to explore from an old school category management mentality to a new one? What do you need? You need intellectual curiosity, you need adaptive intelligence, etc. And I think, on that point, that's the journey. And I had a conversation with a couple of the respected recruiters in the procurement space at Mark Pereira's event recently. And we were talking about where these people are going to come from, this new generation of category managers or whatever they're going to be called, these orchestrators, where they're going to come from. They're obviously going to have to come from procurement backgrounds. What are the key skills they're going to need to make that journey from the old way of thinking to the new way of thinking? Precisely the skills we've been discussing. So, I had that conversation with Mark as well. In fact, after the SAP event, I had that conversation with Mark a couple of weeks ago. So there we are. Gordon, we could talk forever on this, I think, but we've covered an enormous amount of stuff there. For those that really want to dig in a bit more into the points that we've raised and discussed the research, what's the best way for people to contact you to pick up the conversation? Is it via LinkedIn, for example?
Yeah, LinkedIn's always the best place to get me. I'm relatively active on LinkedIn. I post something every day of videos or other articles that I find interesting and what have you, or things that I write. So definitely connect me on LinkedIn and reach out if you want to have a discussion. You'll put the link through to the Economist Impact hub site. There's so much data on there. There's stuff you can download, not just the papers, but there's a whole range of infographics that will be specific to each of the personas or each of the regions. So you can download an awful lot in there together with some videos, and please go and do that.
And the one that's running right now, the research running right now, when are you hoping to probably start next year? Is that sort of summertime or autumn?
May. So the hub site always gets, so just before World Procurement Congress in May. The paper's always ready for that. That's always the deadline. It might be soft launched, but it'll be launched and then it'll be properly kind of amplified from June onwards. But no, it'll be ready for World Procurement Congress in May. I'll be there. I'll be hosting my broadcast centre as normal.
Yeah, I'll see you there. And that change management for the era podcast, which I think is a must listen to any procurement leader, I'll post that in the notes as well. But Gordon, just left for me to say thank you so much. You stayed up quite late in Australia. I was up quite early in the UK this morning. We've managed to get through the entire conversation without talking about our respective football teams, United and City. So I think after the weekend results,
all right.
Yeah. Well, look, I can't thank you enough. Really appreciate your time. And please do reach out to Gordon if you need more details. He's obviously very, very well informed on all these key subjects for this era of AI and procurement. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks.